In today's Python Pandas video, we're going to be taking a look at difference, which allows you to find the difference between either rows or columns. They can either be sequential or they could be separated a bit apart with a term called periods. We'll cover all that in the video, as well as use cases with time series and group bys. 9 examples to cover, so grab a Python notebook and let's start coding. All right, let's jump right into it. We're going to import in pandas as PD and then import numpy as np. And then we're good to get started with our first example. So we're going to first build out a data set for this. And what I'm just going to call this is df YouTube. And I believe we're going to actually use the second one a little bit later on in the video. But we'll start off with this and DataFrame. We'll pass in some values. We'll just call this YouTube views. So YouTube views. And inside over here, let's populate a few different numbers. One thing to note is if you do want to save some time and just copy some parts of the code, we have an article based around this on our website. Now, not all of our videos have articles as of yet. I meant to put a colon in over here, but we are working on our backlog. But all of our new videos should have articles associated with them. Maybe not the best out of the gate, but we will improve those over time. All right, so DF YouTube is like this over here, and just to quickly show you that this worked, we'll go over here and DF YouTube head, all right, and yeah, YouTube views over here. We did nothing with the index, so we are good to go. So let's start off with example number 1, and what we're gonna do on this is use a default period of 1, so default period, and we're not even gonna pass in any parameters. So what we're going to do on here is say df and YouTube. And inside over here, we're going to say views change. So views change. And what we'll have over here is this is equal to df YouTube. That's, and all we do is .diff, right? And I'll show you the results here in a second. Right? Easy as this. Just put .diff here at the end, and you'll see the view change difference. Now, what this does is find the difference of the current row and the one earlier. Now, because there wasn't an earlier row over here, we get a null value, which is represented by NaN, right? The row index 0 is our first row, so there's nothing to base it off of. We'll show you a few different approaches on how to clean this up a little bit later on in the video if you don't want that null value. A little bit of a sneak peek. But regardless, let's go into row 1. And what you'll see is we have 675. So we take 800, we subtract 125, we get the value of 675. Up next, we take 335 minus 800, we get negative 465. Now, for some people, you want to find the absolute difference, and we'll cover that a little bit later in the video as well. But don't worry, I'll show you how to do that. But we have negative 465. Up next, we take 400 minus 335, we get 65. And lastly, we take 1500, subtract 400, we get 1100. Quite basic. So that's our first example. All right, again, it takes your current row, subtract the row above, and populates this over here for your new column, which is pretty helpful. But what I will show you now is we take a look at example 2. And what we're going to do is change the periods. So we're going to say period equals 2. That's going to be the first parameter we take a look at is periods. And what periods allows you to do is subtract other rows rather than like the one directly above that. So let's go through that. So a lot of the code is going to be the same, right? So we're just going to copy this over here. We're going to say views change, and we're just going to call this 2 period. So 2 periods like that. And then we're going to pass in over here periods equals 2, periods equals 2. Again, only difference, periods equals 2. We have a new column name, and I do have an error. What I meant to say over here is pass in YouTube views, because we do have multiple columns over here now. So make sure you pass in your specific column. Should have mentioned that a little bit earlier, but that should have been fine. And yeah, let's take a look at DF YouTube now. And we'll say if you are working on a data frame that has multiple columns, make sure to call your one column right over here. The first one, it didn't matter because we only had 1 YouTube views, but now since we have multiple over here, make sure you specify the column on that side of things. And I'll mention in an article as well. All right, so periods 2, what you see over here now is we have 2 null values for 125 and 800. And again, it goes back to what I mentioned earlier. We don't have anything before index of 0, so this is a null value. And then this one over here, since now we're taking a look at 2 back, it would look at the one above 125, which doesn't exist, so you see a null value there. 335, you take 335 minus 125, you get 210. You take 400 minus 800, you get negative 400, and you take 1500 minus 335, and you get 1165. So this time we look back to when we do periods equals 2. Next example is going to be the absolute difference. So this goes back into what I mentioned over here with the negative 465. So let's get our example for that. So we'll say example 3, the absolute difference. And this is honestly pretty easy to do. All we're going to do on this side of things is df YouTube. We'll just say views absolute difference. Absolute difference. We have our YouTube views. We have our diff. We're going to just do a period of 1 this time. You could put period equals 1, or you could just leave it blank like that. And then just do apps like that, right? And what you'll see now, if we go over here, this value over here is going to be always positive, right? The absolute difference is always going to be a positive value. So the only one that's going to really impact is this negative 465. It's 465. Again, we're just subtracting across one row to one row, right? And then we just make sure absolute makes sure it's positive. Some people just want to see the absolute difference. So that's why we went over that example. All right, so what I want to show you is we can apply this to multiple columns at once. So I showed you how this only worked with YouTube views. We're actually going to create a new data frame. So we'll say example for diff multiple. And what we're going to do over here is take a look at 2 athletes and look at card sales for them. So we're going to just create something called monthly card sales. We're going to say this is pd.dataframe, so dataframe, and we'll pass in a dictionary here again. We're going to start off with a cricketer, Donald Bradman, and let's say for sales wise, he has 28 cards that sell, then 46, and then 33. And then we're going to look at baseball player Nolan Ryan. And then over here, we'll say 511. So 511, 702, and 611. All right. And that's the number of cards that sold each month. Again, all fictitious data. And just to show you really quick what this looks like. Right. Donald Bradman, Nolan Ryan, nothing really too special. And if we want to find the differences for both of these, right, really quickly, you can also create multiple columns at the same time, but we can just go over here to diff, right, and you can see we have that. And again, if you want to do multiple columns at the same time, which I actually didn't put this in my example code, so I'll do this after. What I'll do over here is say this is equal to, like that. And we'll go over here, 2 brackets, Don Bradman diff, and then we'll say Nolan Ryan diff like this, right? And just to show you what that looks like, we have that over here. So we have the Donald Bradman diff, right? Because that's the first thing we're taking a look at. 46 minus 28, 18, 33 minus 46, negative 13, and Nolan Ryan. 702 minus 511, 191 is 611 minus 702, we get negative 91. So I'm just going to copy this over really quick to my sample code, but I think it's a good addition to that. And we're going to keep going. We're going to look at columns now. So I showed you how to do it with rows, right? And this one, we looked at multiple columns. But what if we take a look at the difference across columns? So we're going to say over here, example 5, diff between columns. And this will happen depending on how your data frame is set up. But we're going to look at df merchants. So we're going to create another data frame, and we're going to call this pd.dataframe. And again, we're going to pass in some data in over here. To save you guys some time, I'm just going to copy this over here like that. All we're doing is looking at how merchants are performing across different quarters. Let's just say we have quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3. Probably should have just made a quarter 4, but that's all right. And then we have index over here, 2023, 2024, and 2025. I do have an error really fast. And it should be capital F, that's why. All right, there we go. And what we're going to just do is change our index name. So let's say df merchants dot index dot name. And we're just going to call this year and our index name over here. And if you aren't too familiar with how indexes work, watch my video on indexes. But that should have been it's pretty obvious on the side of things. So what we'll do over here is df mergence, and you can see we have years index and we have quarters 1, 2, and 3. Again, I don't know why I didn't do 4, but I probably should have had it. But regardless, what I want to do over here is find the differences. So what we're going to do is go here df.mergence or df merchants, and we're going to do .diff. And this time what we're going to do is pass in our axis. So we'll say axis equals 1 like that, and you'll see the differences, right? So up first, quarter 1 is going to be all null values, because there's nothing before quarter 1. Quarter 2, you see the differences. So 29, right, for this one, negative 50 for this one, 220 minus 270, negative 50, right? And then 50 over here, 380 minus 330, 50 difference. And then we go into quarter 3, right? And you see 250 minus 211, 39, 230 minus 220, 10, and then 390 minus 380, which is 10. So again, if you want to look at differences between columns, use axis equals 1. If you're looking only at rows, just use the default. And you'll see that happen all the time. A lot of the videos, right, if you want to look at columns, just put an axis equals 1. All right, we're going to look at example 6, which is based around time series data. So say example 6, time series with date index. So date index like that. And again, we'll have to create some data for this. So we're going to just say dates equals pd.dateRange. And date range will be covered in a future video. It's going to be recorded either later this week or next week. But anyways, we're going to look at this one over here. We're going to start with 2025 04 19. We're going to look at 7 days. So periods over here equals 7. And then we're going to say frequency is day. So frequency like this equals day, right? So 7 days, 7 periods of a day, starting on 4/19. Have that over here, and then we're going to have different temperatures on this side of things. So temps equals, and I wrote this video when I was on a train to Zermatt, so I just looked at some example Zermatt temperatures in Fahrenheit. Not super accurate on these, but it's all right. It was like in the 30s, so I felt like this would be a pretty cool example to put. So we have temps like that over here, and then we'll say df temps equals pd.dataframe, and again we'll just pass in a dictionary over here. We'll start with dates, pass in dates, and then temperatures and temps. Right. Should be good over here. Great. And just to show you that, I need to set an index now, so we're going to set a date index. So df temps set index. But in date over here, we'll say in place equals true. Can't type right now, so jet lag is hitting in today, but that's all right. In place equals true, and we'll say df temps dot sort index. And you want to always make sure your index is sorted when you're working with date and time data. You can see it should be when we did PD date range, but always good just to double check. You can see 4/19 through 4/25 with the temperatures over here. And all we're going to do is look at temp change. So we're just going to do df temps. We're going to call it temps change. So temp change, say equals df temps temperature, should be temperature dot diff. Yeah, I called it temperatures. Let me just double check that for you guys over here. Temperatures, yeah, should be temperatures. So that's just gonna be a temp change, and you can see the temp change across both. It's super important to use diff once you jump into time series analysis. I've already covered in a few videos in the time series playlist, and I think we'll put this here early on in that playlist as well. But you can see temperature right here, right? So you have 32, 30, you see a difference of 2, 1, 32, negative 1. So it's like essentially the same what we covered like in the beginning with super, super basic stuff, right? With YouTube view change difference, right? But literally only here, I just set our index as a date, whereas above there was no specific index, right? Use a basic integer to index. This time we have everything indexed by date for a time series. All right, so now what I want to show you is dealing with some of the null values. So the null values can be a little bit annoying. So we're going to go through a few different examples of dealing with null values. So we're going to just call this example 7, dealing with null values. This one's going to be prior to finding the difference, prior to diff. So a few different approaches. This time we're going to use a fill NA. And I have a full video on different methods of filling missing data. And I also have a video coming up a little bit later on interpolation. So there's a ton of different ways that you can fill this. But again, we're just doing something basic over here. Data equals, we're going to look at time data of trains. This was literally the only thing I could think of about when I was on the train rides recently. So we're just going to pass in train times. I'm not going to type all this out. So I'm just going to copy this in 8, 8:15, 8:30, 8:45, 9, and 9:15. And then the passengers for trains. So we'll just pass that in over here. So we have passengers as well as the time of the train. I don't even know how many passengers are typically on the trains. These seem a little bit low, but regardless, what we're going to do is call this non-df. So non-df equals pd.dataframe, pass in our data. And what we're going to do on here now is just show you really quick that there are the null values, although you should believe me because you see it right over here. I'll just run this and you can see we have the null values over here for 8:30 and then 9:15. So let's look at how we can fill this in and then also find the difference. So what we're going to do over here is say non-df, we'll find the difference, equals non-df. We're going to look at passengers, so passengers, and then we're going to say fill NA first, so fill NA. Let's just say if we don't know how many passengers are on a train, we have 100, and then we do the diff. So what you'll see now is we're just creating a new column called diff, right? We're going to temporarily fill the NA values with 100 and then find the difference. We're going to keep those null values in our data frame, but we'll have that. So just to show you where that is, if we go to non-df, diff, and you can see now that this has defaulted to the value of 100, right? And then we take 100 minus 125, negative 25. And then since this is still 100, 130 minus 100 is 30. So what I want to do now is just show you what would happen if we don't have that over here. I'm going to say diff no not filled NA. And again, this is something I didn't add into my initial video notes, but I think it's important just to show you the difference really fast. So I'm just going to copy that over here. And we'll look at non-df again. So we'll run that. And then you can see over here, we have a lot more null values, right? So this one's easy, 125 minus 125, right? But since we have a null value here, we can't find a difference. Since there's a null value here, we can't find the difference here. We can take 128 minus 130, negative 2, but since we have a null value here, we can't take that difference again. So by filling in your null value when you're creating a new column, right, we'll just put fill NA and then do the diff. It assigns it at that temporary value for then when you want to find the difference. So in this case, the static 100 is filled in over here before we find the difference. And that's what happens if you pass it before diff, right? And again, let me just copy that over here. But now what I want to show you is a few different approaches on how we could fill this first value. So we have this value right over here. So let me show you how we could do that. Again, there's a lot of different approaches that you could do, but we're going to say example 8, different ways to fill in first value. Let's jump right through that. So what we're going to do on here, I believe we're still using temps, which is a little bit earlier. Let me just double check on here. Yeah, let's still use df temps to fill in our first value just because these have multiple null values. So what we're going to do over here is df temps. And we're going to put over here filled with a backfill, so bfill. And we're going to say this is equal to df temps temp change dot bfill. Sorry, it should be brackets. So temp change and then dot bfill. That's a backwards fill. And we'll have a video on the channel. I don't know if we have it yet of backwards and forward fill. But there's that. Fill bfill. Okay. And what I want to do next is take a look at filled 0. And what we'll do over here is say fill NA, pass in 0, should be dot fill NA. And we covered fill NA right over here, right? You're just passing in a static value. In this case, we're passing in 0. So we'll run that. And lastly, what we're going to do is find the mean. So we'll say mean change equals, and we'll go over here, df temps dot temp change dot mean, right? And what we'll do is do the fill NA again, but this time pass in our mean change. We have this over here. Just cleaner to call it above and then put that in over here. And yeah, let's show you these 3 approaches, right? So this is a backwards fill. This is filling an NA. Let's just say fill an NA with a 0. Again, you can specify how you want it. Or take a look at a statistic like mean, which again, mean might not be the best approach, but basic for this video. So on df temps, and you can see we have the temp change. Again, the null value up here first. So when we look at backwards fill, and actually I messed this up. I should say filled mean. Let me just rerun both of these. So I'll say that, and then we rerun that. All right. So backwards fill. So what we'll do is this will take the next row and fill it in backwards, right? So since we had the value of 2, it fills it in with 2. Next, we look at filling in the value with 0. So instead of a null value, we have 0. And lastly, the mean. Well, the mean in this case was 0.5. So 0.5 is going to be filled in. Again, a lot of different approaches that we could use. Check out my missing data video within Python Pandas because it covers this and much more. But just 3 simple ways that you can fill in this first null value. Last example in this video is going to be group by, and after that we'll just recap everything we've covered. So we'll say example 9, which is going to be our group by, and I'm going to pass in some more data in over here. We're going to take a look at running events. So we have our date, which we're going to use a date range, the event 5K, 10K, half, marathon. We're going to look at 3 of each of these. Again, some of the more popular events. I actually had my first 5K in like 5 years next week. So probably after this video is already published. So I'll let you guys know how I do on that. I'm going to try for sub 19. I'm not that fast, but it'll be a good one. So we have that over here. And then we have the time for these different races on this side of things. So that is going to be our data. And we're just going to call this df running. So we'll say df running equals pd.dataframe, pd.dataframe, pass in our data here like that. We're going to sort our values, running.sort values. I'm going to go over here by equals, and we're going to go event and date. Do in place equals true, in place equals true. Cool. And we're going to reset our index, df running reset index up equals true, in place equals true. I'll just show you what this looks like really quick. So here's what our df running looks like. So we have our date, the event, and then the time associated with it. So you can see all the 10Ks there, 5Ks, half, and then marathon. And what we'll do next is look at the time change difference between them. So I'll go over here, df running, go over here to time change. So time change. Can't type today. So time change equals df running. And we're going to group by the different events. So group by our events, right? Because you don't want to be comparing your marathon time to your half time or a marathon to a 5K. You look like there's a big difference. So we're going to group by our event, and we're going to look at the difference in time. And then we're just do .diff. Right? This should just be underscore here, not dash. And that's why you have that. And just to look at the last result, right? df running. First will always be null values. Again, I should have to clear that up. So if you want to clear that up, null value, null value, null value, and then the differences, right? So -1, -2, and negatives in this case is better. You want to see your times going down. And these are all negatives across over here. We're just going to assume runners got better as they practice a little bit more. But yeah, that is diff in Python Pandas. We covered a lot. You can see in the beginning, right, period of 1, if blank, you could also specify the amount of periods, looked at the absolute difference of multiple rows and columns at the same time. And then we covered, again, you can just put 2 brackets to create those at the same time. I showed you the difference between columns, so use axis equals 1. Also showed you how you could do this with specifically time series data with a date index. Scrolling down a little bit more, we showed you how to deal with null values prior to finding the diff, right? It won't fill in your null value, but it'll assign that null value and look at the difference between that if you're creating a brand new column. Different ways to fill in the first null value, right? I showed you 3 different approaches. Again, there's a ton of them out there. And then lastly, I showed you a group by example, which is used quite a bit, especially when you're using categories. This case, running, right, 5K, 10K, half, marathon, completely different races across the board. So you don't want to compare half marathon time to a 5K time. You want to compare all 5K times, or all 10K times, all half times, all marathon times. And yeah, that was this video. Thanks guys for checking out this video on difference within Python Pandas. If you found it valuable, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We're trying our best to upload multiple data focused videos every single week. A few links down below, I think will help you guys out. We have our free Discord for our members, link to the article, and also one-on-one mentorships are there. If you want to continue with this Pandas course, well, click right over here to check out more videos.